they're doing the hammer approach to everything. They see a problem, they try to like Twitter. Well, let's try to destroy it. Let's try to ban it. Let's put them in prison. Like I saw the guy from Telegraph was just arrested in France a couple of days ago, and where after they both the Russians were talking about what's it called, banning Telegram. Problem is, they need a telegram to actually call in artillery strikes to communicate, just like the Ukrainians are using Telegram. Isn't it like, isn't like you're using Telegram to call in a strike? They were. I mean, Joseph, I want to.
Folks, put this in your manual of what not to do to plan military operations. Send signals in the clear so your enemy can make sure to understand what you're about to do. Yeah, that worked so well for the Russians at Tannenberg.
I mean, next time I'm somewhere, I'll send a coordinate, a picture of a little rocket and a negative emoji. Negative tank emoji coordinate, please fire. So, of course, they want to shut everything down because you can
have Telegram account, Tavarish. We need to be able to communicate with you.
That was one of the problems they had on the front line at the Kursk initiative, was they had taken a lot of the cell phones away from the young soldiers, so they couldn't call each other. And you have a problem with the comms? And I keep thinking, and we all make fun of this. I've been on a number of maneuvers where the go-to is, well, just pick up your cell phone and call them back at base because the radio's not working. So don't make fun of the Russians because we do the same damn thing. So for protesters to go on Twitter and go like, here we go. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
But you can't ban your way out of everything because it just doesn't work.
This is their problem. You have people desperately clinging to power who are just outnumbered. I mean, that's the plain bottom line here.
Yeah.
And they're not only outnumbered, but they're stupid, and everybody can see that their ideas are stupid.
Yes.
And this is the big problem. Everybody knows that Klaus Blowschwab, as I like to call him, Freiherr Blowschwab und Bloviation. Yeah. But, yes, I'll. But anyway, this idiot, the more he talks and the more he publishes, I think the more he just does himself in, because people, he's like that Baron in the movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Baron von Bombburst. but this guy is just plain nuts, and I think the more these people talk, the more people realize these people are nuts. They do not deserve our trust. They don't know how to run anything. They're responsible for getting the world into the mess that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Do we need to go to war with Russia? Really?
I would like to think no.
Do we really need to go to Russia and start a nuclear war over the Ukraine? No. Is the Ukraine a democracy? Not really. On and on we could go. Do we really want to start a war with Iran? Why? And do what? Do what with it? If we win, what are we going to do with it? We're going to have.
Can't we just do a color revolution like we usually do? They work so well.
Oh yeah, they've worked real well.
Really?
Oh yeah. What have we been successful with all these military diplomatic adventures since the end of World War II? How many have been successful? By my reckoning, we're looking at a big fat goose egg. So I don't see the rhyme or reason in it, and I think more and more people are waking up to realize that these people are nuts.
Yeah. I mean, like I said about the British government, if you have actually, as a British government, managed to get the Protestant and the Catholics in Ireland to march together, really screwed up.
You've really screwed up. And as you put it, the Hindus and the Buddhists and everybody else, because they don't want their kids, to be raped by whatever they are. you're looking at just massive incompetence, and
Yeah.
it's across the board. I can't look at any country other than maybe one or two exceptions in Europe that are being relatively sanely run. And the countries in Europe that are relatively sanely run right now, I would say, are Austria, Italy, Hungary, and all the rest of them have their own.
Poland.
Poland, maybe. But the rest of them,
They're completely lost. And that's an interest. Actually, I wanted to ask you this because this is one thing. I wrote book. My first book was for women on how to stay safe and protect themselves because of my background in personal protection and dealing with women's safety issues. And I lost my shit when I saw it admitted by the administration that they had lost 320,000 children in the past 3 years. They do not know where they are. And 300,020 children are missing from the system. They came unaccompanied minors. They were placed. They don't know where they are. Joseph, how in the hell do we call ourselves a civilized country when we lose 300,000 plus children? And where do they? This is America. This is not the rest of the world. There seems to be an ongoing war on women and children, just like you look at the grooming gangs in England for the past 40 years. No one cares. No one has cared about what happens to women and children. And now they're just gone. I mean, how's that? There's got to be something more at stake than just the occasional human trafficking and sex rings here.
Well, I do think that that's a large part of it. I do. But I also think it's part of the moral contradiction of the West. You know, we're gonna protect women's rights by giving them open abortion full term, 60 million abortions since Roe v. Wade, and that's not all rape, folks.
I know.
So you've basically taught a whole generation of women to hate their own ability to reproduce and to hate their own children and to view them,
hate other people's children.
And especially, yes, absolutely. We've got to remember that whole thing was a brainchild of Margaret Sanger, and what a wonderful person she was.
Oh, yes.
But I do think that a significant segment of this is the human trafficking and child sacrifice, because I do think that there is a deep underground that practices all of those old occult rituals and does so with reckless abandon.
And I don't understand why there's no outcry in the media. There must be someone subduing. Why can't we talk about the Epstein list? By the way, thank you, Bill.
Exactly. You asked about the cabal earlier, and I think we have to quit pussyfooting around. We know who the major families involved in many of these globalist activities are. With a little research, I strongly suspect that we could connect some members of those families into these deep, dark practices. We've got things like the Franklin scandal in this country. We've got the Jimmy Savile scandal in the United Kingdom, and then we've got all of the little connections between all of that and Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein and so on and so forth. So I think that whole story is a story that has yet to be really well researched, and for anybody that would undertake to do it, it's so dark, and you'd have to be so very careful about doing it, because essentially you're painting a big target on yourself.
I mean, are we so desensitized as a human being now because of all the stuff that we don't?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's the desensitizing. Tino, got so bad for me in the last 2 years that I've literally had to turn off virtually all electronic media.
Yes.
I don't even listen to talk radio with anywhere near the amount. I listen to enough to keep abreast of the news, and then I turn it off.
Yeah.
I literally cannot stand it anymore.
No, and
Because
you
it
have
is,
to.
you have to.
Psychologically, it was proven that
Yes.
just by 2 weeks, if you turn off the notifications on your
Yes.
cell phone alone,
Yes.
that will make you far happier. And I think that
Yes.
the problem, you have all the depression, the suicides, and the trouble with kids, is because of self. And it's interesting. Now I'll tell you something that's very interesting. Since the invention of the iPhone, in 1980, less than 8% of men over 30 were virgins. Today, 30% of men over 30 are still virgins.
I can believe it.
And 80% of men of 18 are still virgins.
I can
And
believe it.
you have a direct correlation between the invention of cell phones and mass media to the fact that people have less sex, they date less, they get to meet each other less, and they live more and more secluded, and suicides and depression is up.
Yep.
It all ties together with you're no longer connecting with people. You're connecting with a fake image.
You're connecting with the fake image, and I would also aver that cell phones have a lot to do with the dramatically falling rates of testosterone and sperm counts in males around the world. I think
agree.
it has a lot to do with it. But getting back to the cabal for a minute,
Oh, yes.
I go back to that statement, and I'm literally haunted by this statement, Tino. In July of 2001, a Russian economist by the name of Dr. Tatiana Koryagina, and I've written about this, commented about this
I remember,
in my
yes.
9/11 book. She came out in I think it was Pravda with a statement that the West would shortly be attacked and America would shortly be attacked on its own soil by a cabal with assets in excess of $300 trillion. That was her statement in July of 2001. And then that was followed up, as you are aware, after the Maidan coup in 2014 in the Ukraine, with the statement of Sergei Glaziev, who said our problem is not with the Nazis in Kiev, it's with the Nazis in Washington.
Yeah.
So the Russians appear to me to have taken the full measure of what it is they're dealing with. And I think they recognize that this is a culturally existential matter, because I can't find any other rationalization for why the Russian president would all of a sudden relax their immigration rules for anybody of traditional mind that wants to move to Russia. We don't care where you're coming from, just so long as you support these traditional cultural ideas.
Yeah.
That's, we haven't seen anything like that from any Western power ever in history. So it's, to me, other than maybe the United States, but even back when the United States was watching its immigration policy very clearly, it wasn't doing so on the basis of a cultural commitment. So,
inviting immigration of people who fits the culture of your own is really good idea.
Yeah, it is. Of course it is.
Of course
and there will be people that will take him up on it.
Yeah.
And, there was the case of those South African farmers trying to get away from what's going on in South Africa. And Russia said, come here.
Yeah.
We can use you, and they will.
We had lots of Americans that filled up a town in Russia for the same thing. They're tired of this. And maybe that's where the borders are going to get erased. It's about a Western sensible common sense culture versus this.
Right.
Okay, this is
you cannot tell me. I go back, Tino, to something that President Macron said years ago at the Verdun Memorial. And to me, this is just typical brainless global loony nonsense that they have no self-awareness even to say something like this. Imagine being the president of France, going to the memorial of the battlefield of Verdun, where over 400,000 of your countrymen died to defend your country, and then getting up in front of the entire world and saying there's no such thing as French culture.
No, I don't remember that. Well, culture of France doesn't really have a culture of its own, you know.
I'm just, if I, well, I am part French, and I was infuriated when he said that. And I'm not even in France. I spent a weekend from hell in Paris once, and that was it. But I was infuriated. What are you talking about, dude? I mean, are you totally clueless? Then I saw his wife.
Yeah. But I mean, Macron is again a World Economic Forum pick. He was picked for the job. He's a little bureaucrat banker.
And this is precisely the point. You cannot tell me that this technocratic idea of government ruling apart from and without reference to the local cultures of who it's trying to govern can ever be successful.
No.
It cannot. It's not going to work in Germany because the Germans like being German. It's not going to work in France because the French like being French, and so on, and so on, and so on. So
that really is the basis of modern managers in the Western. You have American presidents who doesn't like America. You have German presidents who doesn't like Germany.
French like Germany and French.
They are about the process. They're about the bureaucracy, about the bigger picture. They're not about their own culture. And you cannot have heads of state who does not like, support, or foster their own culture. I mean, look at the EU, and Heinrich Himmler, who designed the EU, conceptualized it, would not have agreed.
Yeah.
I think Himmler is spinning in his
What a
back.
success this has been, huh? No.
Mr. Hallstein, come see Himmler and explain to him your idea.
Thank you for bringing this up. You're referring to that 1942 IG Farben Reichsbank study of how we're going to create a European Union. Well, here we are, folks. You're in it. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because if you look at that original, the study was done in 1942, folks. I talk about it in my book, The Third Way. Well, in that whole study, I actually managed to get a copy of the dang thing.
Really?
Oh yeah, I got a copy. I printed it out, and
please send it to me.
Oh, I don't even know where I put it. That's
never mind. I'll buy your. I have your book here, so never mind.
Well, it's in there somewhere. You can go look it up online, and you can actually find the table of contents. And I'm looking at the table of contents, and you're exactly right, Tino, because there's all of these very learned papers from all these very learned people, professor of this, doctor of that, and not one of these papers is about the cultures of the countries they're going to be doing all of this to. Not one. So in other words, we're going to all just make this run by smooth process. And sorry, it ain't going to work.
And to some degree, even the Treaty of Versailles, they were sitting there. They were sitting there in the president's office with little crayons and maps and trying to figure out, well, these people, well, they look like belong here and they belong here, without any reference to the culture, the people, the language. And, well, that pretty much got us into World War II. And here we are now. Same thing.
Let's go further with the Treaty of Versailles. As they're there with their pencils and their crayons, mapping out what Europe is going to look like. Let's remember that the Treaty of Trianon and the Treaty of Versailles both had a special clause that all of this applies except in the case of Austria and Germany.
Sure.
Because you remember after World War One, when they break up the Habsburg Empire, where does Austria want to go? Well, Austria
Germany.
wants to become part of the Reich, become part of Germany. We can't have that.
Nope.
Sorry, that Wilsonian doctrine of self-determination is going to go right out the window.
Yep.
So yeah, the hypocrisy is just.
I still love how Austria managed to get away with the whole voluntary Anschluss thing by just we were the first ones invaded. and you know, like what, a third of the SS was from Austria, and there were all these millions of waving. There's books written up by people who accompanied Hitler. Everybody was waving and celebrating, cheering them on. Yeah, they were absolutely occupied, and I know they came up at the Nuremberg trials and well. See, we were all from 1938 to 1945. We Austrians were all on vacation, and when we come back, the Germans had done all this. And I'll tell you a funny story on that because that continues to today. I'm doing research with the Vienna archive. I said, so Bergkristall and some of these things that was built during the war, the bunkers, the tunnels, the factories. I'm talking to the head marketing muck at the archive. Said he is in charge of construction projects in Austria. So okay, well I need this and this and this. You have a Bergkristall, you have these things. He said, oh no, I don't have anything like this because it was not built by Austrians.
Oh, jeez.
It was built in Austria, dude. Like, no. The Germans did it. We didn't do it, so I don't have it in my archive. Like, kill me.
It wasn't us. They did it.
They did it. And it's just, can we stop it? The Russians left in 1955. You can go back to, we did a little bit of it.
The Russians are long gone, folks.
They wouldn't even let me film in the cafe where Lenin and Hitler they both had coffee.
Since we're both talking about Austria,
Jawohl.
Why, in the name of sense, are we insisting that the Ukraine become part of NATO? Neutrality worked very well for Austria.
Yeah,
the Russians weren't invading them. We didn't have to invade them. They minded their own business, made their cuckoo clocks and their Zachertorter mit Schlag, and here we are. And it would have worked in the Ukraine, but we had to press that. So, you know.
Well, the Austrians do as they are told. Maybe not the Ukrainians. They are only following orders still today. I'm sorry. No. Got confused. What?
Got confused.
That sort of leads me to one thing I always wondered.
You know, that's like saying Operation Barbarossa was a minor border incursion.
It was a few units. They strayed across the border.
It was just a few units.
It was foggy.
What are you getting so upset for, Stalin?
If Stalin didn't want his forward airfields bombed, he shouldn't have placed them 700 yards from the border.
From the border, yes.
And all those nice troop trains full of munitions.
What was the Red Army doing so close to the border, by the way?
I know.
The whole thing is just...
the whole concept of the outbreak of that war, it needs to be rewritten.
Well, this is the other problem that we're running into with what's going on now, is we have been fed so many popular narratives that are so much, pardon my Latin here, so much excretum Thorium, which is Latin for BS. It's better in Latin. but anyway, the whole thing, all of these narratives that we carry around in our head about World War I, World War II, the American Civil War, and so on, are so far removed from the actual truth of things that this is our other problem. We don't learn from history quite simply because the history we've been taught is a lie.
Yeah.
That's particularly in the case of World War I and World War II. I'm now convinced that there are just big, huge, whopping lies with the American war between the states as well.
I
But,
agree. I've been good at, yeah.
well, there it is.
Yes, it's I guess the last good war. There you go. Is it out for sale yet?
It is up at the publisher for pre-sale. Yeah.
Well, outstanding. Give us a quick rundown.
I don't know where to begin.
Give us a long run. Start from the middle.
I do. I actually start the book at the end of the Civil War because I don't want to refight the whole dang thing.
That's been done.
That's been done many times. But everything that you've learned about the end of the Civil War is wrong. It was gigantic continuity of government operations going on by the Confederacy.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. Huge. The finances of all I can tell you is if you come away from this book, I wrote it in such a way that you're going to have to read a lot between the lines, even when I'm being very explicit, because there's a huge gaping hole in the center of all this, and it's called missing money, and lots and lots and lots and lots of it, and hidden systems of finance. If this is sounding, I'm pushing my whole thesis back.
Are we talking about the Second World War or the Civil War now?
We're talking about the Civil War.
That's what I mean. It sounds familiar.
Yeah, it is.
Is there a template here?
Yes.
Ah.
This book, Tino, I was researching this book for about a year and a half, and I've dropped little clues about in interviews and on my website. I was not able to find what I knew was out there somewhere. And so the book was turning into a compilation of statistics. Look at this number, look at that, and nobody's going to read that kind of stuff. The eyes glaze over.
Uh-huh.
And I was not able to find a way to organize this book until two books worked their way to the top of my reading pile. If people have ever visited my house, they know that everything is a library. The kitchen is the library. The bedrooms are the library. The living room is the library.
Yep.
So anyway, two books finally worked their way to the top of my reading pile for this book. And I got into these two books into about 50 pages, and bang, I found it. I found what I was looking for. And by the way, these books were written right around the turn of the last century. And they were books I had to buy, and they were books that had been thrown out of college libraries.
That makes that. That's accreditation right there.
Well, I suspect that they thought, well, the information in these things can't be that important. Mm-hmm. They contained some very crucial details that cinched the case. Absolutely cinched. It confirmed what I knew was missing in spades. So the pattern is there. It is undeniably there. It rationalizes all of that postbellum financial crap all the way up to Woodrow Wilson. And I mean all of it.
Huh? Oh, God, now I got to read. Now I really look forward to reading it.
It explains what was going on with the murder of President Lincoln. It explains why Jeff Davis is running around all of the South with
building railroads.
Listen, if nothing else, you'll come away with, I hope people come away from this book with new respect for Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis, both of them. These were not stupid men, and they were both very principled men.
Yes, I believe.
But it's all I can tell you is it's quite a read. mistakes and all. I literally finished this book. I started it and finished it in 2 weeks. I typed my fingers to bloody stumps because I was trying to go as fast as I could before I lost the organizational template I had in my noggin.
You know, you can just dictate onto Word.
I don't do that because it comes out with even more typos and errors and omissions than even I do when I'm typing. You know, I that stuff can't keep up with me.
Well,
And it would come out with gibberish. So people are, you know,
well,
as with all my books, you're just going to have to edit out the typos and so on as you go.
so in the book, are you touching on the most sensitive
Yes.
American topic in the world, that the most important thing, a crisis of our life, the slavery part?
No.
Really? You talk about the
No.
part of the Civil War without slavery? I wonder how that's possible.
At the very beginning, I say I'm absolutely opposed to it. I regard it as abominable, and I have no intention of discussing it. And the only other reference in the whole book is a reference to chattel versus wage slavery. That's
Yeah,
it.
that's interesting. Yes.
Well, that was Jefferson Davis's criticism of the abolitionist platform. Was you're just turning chattel slavery into wage slavery. That was straight out of his Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government. You know, the guy was his post-war memoirs are very interesting, Tino, not for what they say, but for the topics he studiously avoids.
Really?
He just I mean, if you've got a copy of his memoir, I do. I've had a copy of his memoirs since graduate school. I found them when I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in graduate school at a bookstop. I thought, oh wow, Jefferson Davis, Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government. I got to have those, you know. So I bought them, and they make very interesting reading. You know, this is the president of the Confederacy. So.
I would love to read his memoir. So that's an older book, so that is obviously a truthful depiction. If you buy a book today, would it be as honestly, correctly, not translated, but set up, or would it be rewritten by you know where I'm going with this? How we rewrite books to fit modern politics.
The modern no.
Yeah.
The copy I have, I would suspect is still available somewhere and would probably not be adulterated in that fashion. But what's interesting, you know, it's a thick book. It's 1,500 pages long, Tino. What's interesting is when you read it, or even if you just look things up in the index, there are certain subjects he does not talk about. He talks about slavery all the time. He does not talk about certain things. He does not talk about Confederate finances.
Really?
And he was up to his earlobes in involvement with it.
Yeah.
He does. Yeah, there's not one word about it. He does not talk about the assassination of President Lincoln. He does not talk at any great length about his own imprisonment. He does not talk about the fact he was never brought to a real trial. None of that is in his memoirs. And here's the kicker. And this is a little tidbit I'll let out for people. In October of 1976, President Jimmy Carter signed into a law a unanimous U.S. Senate resolution that restored Jefferson Davis's citizenship.
Really?
Yes. Yes. So add all that together, and you've got a Confederate president that ain't talking. But I do think, given the nature of the man, and that this is no dummy, that what he's trying to do is raise attention to something by not talking about it.
It almost seems that way because
Yeah.
to avoid those particular topics, which would probably be why half of the people would read the memoirs based on his thoughts on those specific topics by
Ding,
omission.
ding. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah.
That is really fascinating. I would love to see if I can get a hold of that book.
Well, it's available right now for pre-order. I don't want to talk much more about it because I don't
No,
want to give
when it's come out, it's been out for a minute. We can talk more about it. But
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It started out being a book about the two different money systems. There are tremendous similarities and there are one or two crucial differences between the Union and the Confederacy. But it began as since we're talking about the state of the world today, turn the clock back and deal with a similar situation with the Confederacy. It always mystified me how the Confederacy managed to hang on as long as it did against the odds that it was facing. How did it finance such a war effort that it did?
Production base?
Well, there was very little, compared to the Union. The Confederacy had almost no heavy ordnance. They had maybe 3 factories in the whole Confederacy. And one of them was the Tredegar Works in Richmond itself.
Yeah.
There were arsenals in Alabama, another one in Louisiana, and another one in Texas. And that was it. That was their heavy ordnance production.
Yeah, I thought they had a much larger production base also for export production.
Oh, there you're talking a different story. Yeah, there you're talking something different. But they were able to sustain a massive war effort for that period of time and do it, create it and do it just like that, literally like that. So there's a lot of stuff about the Civil War. What I did in the book was I outlined a big, huge mystery with a lot of missing money. Gobs of it. You're going to be astounded when you read the very end of it. I was so astounded, Tino, that there's one page in the book where all I did was I put a big, huge exclamation mark. It's about a 20 to 24 pitch exclamation mark. Bold. So you can't, it's just there. Because if you don't have that reaction like I did to that particular little piece of information, I can't help you anymore.
All right. When I've read it, then we're going to talk about that. Because it's interesting because the perception that we've been given today of the Confederacy is that they're a bunch of backyard rubes
that like slaves and
but they couldn't have had a massive industrial complex or money of finances if they were. And it's interesting because, of course, being of evil Prussian descent, I'm sitting here thinking about the American Civil War. What were they doing? And it's one of the things I didn't start diving into, but the more I started looking, just glancing at the Civil War claims, the more questions I come up with going like, this wasn't just about slavery, was it? This is really not really anything to do with it. It's just other things. And the way we're portraying the Civil War today and the South today is completely wrong. And it's still wrong today.
It's my fascination with it, Tino, began, and I'm fascinated with it now. And another reason I wrote this book is precisely to deal with the kind of topics that we're talking about in the interview today, because we're in a very similar situation.
Yeah.
My fascination with the Civil War began when I was a boy, and we took a trip to Washington, D.C. to visit my uncle. And we went with my grandparents. My little French Bonapartist Confederate grandmother. I don't know how else to describe her. She was about 5 feet tall, and she was a pistol. We went out to the battlefield of Bull Run, outside of D.C., where the Confederacy had its first major military victory in that war. And I remember my grandmother pulling me around the battlefield, pointing this out and pointing that out and reading all the signs to me and everything. And this is where General Beauregard did this, and that's where Colonel Jackson did that. And I'm like, what? And I became fascinated with it, particularly when my dad, as we're going through the gift shop, bought me a packet of Confederate currency facsimile. And that currency fascinated me because of what it said on the currency. And it fascinates me to this day. It's very similar. It's very, very, it's really close to the Lincoln greenback, what it says on the Confederate currency. And that's another little mystery, because we're told that, Lincoln had this wonderful idea of debt-free money. The Confederacy comes close, but doesn't quite get there.
Well,
and in that, there's a tail. And on top of this, you've got the military differences between the two combatants. And it's very clear. You've got a very capable general officer corps in the Confederacy. Very, very capable.
And it was a diverse military too.
And it was a very diverse military. But the interesting thing about the Confederate officer corps and the Confederate military is it's fighting for completely different war aims than the Union, and that colors the way they approach the war and the way they approach their financing. So this is a microcosm of how to set up financial policy in conjunction with a war aim. The Union does a much better job of it than does the Confederacy, but the Confederacy, by the same token, is having to invent a system whole cloth out of nothing and do it quickly. It's an amazing story, and it continues after the war.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it sounds like a template that have been repeated itself.
Oh yeah,
all the way to today.
Yes, it has, right down to the exotic technology.
Speaking of exotic technology and books, Kurt Diebner wrote a book in 1946. And Diebner wrote a book, and the Allies wouldn't publish it. And
I wonder why.
about his what he discovered in the nuclear program, and I've been trying to track it down through existing family members. I'll make sure you get a copy if I find one.
Yes, I will. If the Allies are saying they don't want Nazi scientists to publish anything about nuclear weapons, then yeah, that perks my interest, because of course we all know that the Germans who invent the field of nuclear physics are completely incompetent when it comes to A-bomb design.
Oh yeah, they had no idea what they were talking about. And all right, I mean, I guess I should tell you a Nazi bedtime story about now that we went from the Civil War, and since I can't ask you specific questions on the Civil War book because I haven't read it yet, so have you ever heard of Alfred Solvay?
Yes, the name is familiar to me, but I can't remember.
I will give you a quick brief. He was born in 1860s, and he is known for the Solvay process, where he would manufacture soda ash, sodium carbonate. He works a lot of calcium and salts and thorium.
Oh.
In fact, he was.
I have an image of Solvay's thorium toothpaste for that for that bright, shiny smile.
A little uranium as goes along.
Uranium, just to add that extra gleam.
Now, the interesting thing, he was from Austria, and he started his business up in the early 20s, where he was doing serious research into thorium salts, and he was incredibly well accredited. So well, we'll put him aside a little bit. And then we fast forward into the glorious Nazis march in, and Dr. Kamla marches in, and then they start a huge underground factory production called Cement by Ibensee. It was initially built large enough to constructed the rockets there. Then they moved them to Doha Mittelbau. So they had this huge underground tunnel factory by Ibensee, several levels, very, very large. I was there a few times. Large. They moved in a synthetic fuel plant. This was operated and run by the SS. One part was built for, I think Mercedes was there. They had truck in one section. But the other, now this is premium territory. This is expensive production facility. And guess who had four tunnels dedicated to him and thorium research? Solvay. Solvay had four tunnels in the SS complex where he was researching into thorium. And the Allies were really interested in that and looking for Dr. Kamla and the banking connections after the war, where they took it over, ran the synthetic plant, but no one mentions the thorium. No one mentions Solvay, and I think he even died before that, but his facility continues. He ran on. And had patented. And now we crawled through this. There's huge tanks in there. There's octagon tanks set up, bases.
Yeah, I was just thinking reactor. They were involved in thorium reactor research.
And if I'm getting a printout of the inventory of machinery the Germans brought there, you know, the one I can't get in the American archives because they told me to go pound sand. Now I'm getting it from the locals. But it's very interesting that thorium seems to be much more prominent in research back then.
Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting when we then fast forward today. For the longest, and if you look up Solvay, there's no mention of it. And I know that you would expect that someone like Wikipedia is researched and really well researched in what they post. They don't seem to mention it. And when you look up thorium, there's a little, just through the basic glances, you'll find, well, we looked at it in the 50s and 60s, and there really wasn't anything to it. But there is, isn't there?
Well, for one, yes, as I mentioned in the Nazi books, and particularly in The Philosopher's Stone, that Serum 525, that heavy red gooey substance that they used in the bell, no one knows exactly what it was made of. So I speculated, as you know, that it was perhaps some oxide compound of thorium and mercury, with the thorium component being the thorium-229 isomer. And the reason for that is that particular isomer, if people don't know what an isomer is a radioactive isotope whose nucleus is in an extremely high state of spin. And if you, so to speak, slam on the brakes and stop that merry-go-round from spinning all of a sudden, it will spit out gobs of gamma rays and X-rays. Now, there's a reason why I'm going into this, folks. The thorium-229 isomer has a very, very low threshold of the amount of energy it takes to get that nucleus to stop spinning. So it becomes, and I hope people who listen to my recent interview with Dark Journalist on the Ripple fusion process will latch onto this. If you were able to control the moments where you stop that isomer from spinning and spitting out all those X-rays and gamma rays, and to cohere that, you could get, conceivably, with enough of the thorium isomer, you could conceivably get an X-ray burst sufficient to drive a fusion bomb.
Yeah.
and do so without the need for an A bomb to set it off. In other words, you are effectively creating a very, very, very clean hydrogen bomb.
And that was one of the things the Germans were researching, a
Yes.
clean nuclear device for
Yes.
battlefield use.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
And they can only do it with fusion, and I go back to all the books I've written about the German A bomb. I do think that they were successful in setting off a fission bomb.
agreed.
I think they realized that it was such a mess to use that fusion became their favored weapon. So if you haven't seen it, Tino, you need to go watch the presentation I did with Dark Journalist on something that was brought to my attention by one of my website members, that when I saw it, I just thought, oh my word. There's lots of connections here.
Will do. Because
between what you're talking about, between the Nazis, this thorium fascination that they had. My speculation has always been that the real reason that they were interested in thorium was twofold. Number one, they realized very early on that it would be a good way to achieve a fission reactor very quickly without the nastiness of uranium and plutonium and all of that. And then secondly, this isomer business, that they needed huge stockpiles of that isomer for use in the Bell device and other experiments. And the way that you would separate, and this is why you've got to read the books and master all the little details of the dots I put into the book, because the best way to get that kind of isomer to the kind of purity that you need to separate it from other stocks of thorium that are not rich in that isomer is through uranium isotope enrichment. And it's that process of isotope enrichment that I think I.G. Farben was involved with at Auschwitz, because there's little clues that the German scientists leave in the farm hall transcripts that they're involved in an isotope enrichment process that is decades ahead of all the stuff that the Americans and British are using in the Manhattan Project.
That's exactly it. And when I look up everything in popular memory today about thorium, and remember, just to give people a recap, thorium is cheap. It's
yes.
plentiful. It is not stupidly toxic. It is very easy to come by, and it's easy to handle. And
it's
also, the energy part that comes into salt solutions.
Yes.
Back to, and when you look at, we told, well, we didn't start looking at it until the mid to late 50s, and we figured out it was too cumbersome to work on, as if we were the first ones to looking at it, which means that everything, like I said, 4 tunnels full of machinery dedicated specifically to this under the SS.
Yeah, I can believe it.
The inventors of the whole man who conceptualized thorium and the value of such was completely hidden in the background. No one talks about it. Again, this has been suppressed. And fast forward till today, if you talk about, now I'm saying that the whole environmental movement is just another part of the global Marxist movement, using the environmental lunatics for their aim by fear factor. But if you talk to an environmentalist who's not willing to entertain the use of nuclear or reactors by thorium to create energy, they're serious. So we're back to a couple of years ago, I almost fell off my chair when I heard President Trump talking about maybe we should look into thorium.
Well, look.
Say what now?
Yeah, thorium reactors have been around for a long time, and my addition to your comments would be this: I've often wondered why it's never been, to me, adequately pursued.
Yeah,
my suspicion has been, ever since doing these books on the Nazi nuclear program, my suspicion has always been they don't want people looking at thorium, not because of the reactors, but they don't want people looking at the isomer.
Yeah.
Because it's when you get to that you get to a substance which conceivably might give you a way to a a non-nuclear primary in a hydrogen bomb. And folks, when you're talking hydrogen bombs, you're talking the really big bang.
Is this not what the Russians have been looking at and talking about, the non-dirty nuclear weapon? Or
Um,
I have an impression that some of the German research in that specific battlefield nuclear device technology went to the Russians because the Russians seemed more interested in it than we did. Lord knows we had no problem radiating out troops and tests, but here.
Well, let me briefly put it this way. It depends on how you are approaching the question of a clean thermonuclear bomb. And the reason why is that you would measure the cleanliness by the percentage of the yield that is the result of the fission primary or the thermonuclear secondary. In other words, let's take the Tsar Bomba, the big 57 megaton
Yes,
whopper.
The thing we really needed.
Yeah, the thing that we really needed.
What you really need is bigger.
Yeah. When you look at the yield of that bomb, it is a relatively clean bomb because most of the yield is obviously coming from the fusion reaction. The atomic bomb that sets it off is a minuscule fraction of that yield. So it's a relatively clean bomb, but it's still spreading all that radioactivity, especially through the stratosphere, because the mushroom cloud, goes up and up and up forever. So the definition of clean is dependent on the yield to fission ratio percentage. The problem comes with what I was talking about with Dark Journalist in the very last interview I did with him, because a member of my website made me aware of of the very last American thermonuclear atmospheric test, which if you go on YouTube, onto Wikipedia and look up Operation Dominic. This was the code name for the series of tests that America did after the Tsar Bomba. And if you look up the very last test, which was codenamed Housatonic, Housatonic.
Okay.
When you look up on Wikipedia the very last test and scroll down all the way over to the last column, it says that the test was of a technology called Ripple, RIPPLE, that it had a yield of approximately 10 megatons.
Okay.
And that it was reportedly, here's the bad news, 99.9% clean.
Ooh.
In other words, the fission primary, the A bomb that set all of this off, was so small that the radioactive fallout from it was almost negligible. All the A bomb was there for was to set off the Big Bang. When you read the paper that is connected to that specific test, and please note the singular, there is only one paper that talks about this in the public record. This was a new technology.
It's a perfect tactical weapon.
Tactical, nothing. 10 megatons is way bigger than tactical.
Well, if you want to erase that army and then walk through and occupy the territory.
Yeah, if you want to erase the whole oblast, yeah, that'll do it.
Yes, well, that's what I mean.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
My name is Tino Struckmann. I run Lost Battlefields. Every year, I travel around the world to try to bring you to all the most interesting historical military locations from modern wars and the World War II special projects, battlefields, forts, fortresses, and tunnels, everything else. Things you may not be able to see or go to yourselves. Please join me on Patreon or join Lost Battlefields through the website so you get access to all my files and my notes. It really does help, and like, follow, share here on the channel if you can. That helps too.